The moment the name slipped into the public sphere, everything changed. It wasn't a quiet ripple. It wasn't a gentle whisper. It was an explosion so loud that even people who swear they don't follow the royal family suddenly had an opinion. And it all started with 4 words that hit harder than anyone expected: Lilibet Grace Wales. A name that sounds soft. A name that sounds delicate. A name that sounds poetic, almost musical. And yet, a name that carries enough emotional dynamite to blow open years of unspoken tension between 2 royal couples who once walked in sync, breathed in sync, and stood shoulder to shoulder on palace balconies as if they were destined to lead the monarchy together. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. So why does this name matter so much now? Why did it feel like a message? Why did people react as though William and Catherine had dropped a subtle, impeccably targeted reply to something Meghan and Harry did years ago? Let's rewind for a moment. Imagine waking up to headlines proclaiming that the Prince and Princess of Wales, the most carefully measured couple in the monarchy, chose a name that mirrors the most controversial baby name moment in modern royal history. A name used previously, or as their critics put it, claimed, by Harry and Meghan for their daughter. A name deeply tied to Queen Elizabeth II's most personal identity. And then picture the absolute frenzy. You would think the world was reacting to election results or a surprise global event. But no, it was a baby name. A baby name carrying legacy, memory, symbolism, and royal politics all tangled together. This isn't just gossip. This isn't just fan speculation. This is about legacy, heritage, revenge, reclaiming, healing, or maybe all of the above. That's what makes the story irresistible. And that's exactly why people immediately leaned in, screens inches from their faces, pulses rising with each new article, tweet, video, and interview dissecting every syllable of the name. Because you have to ask yourself, did William choose this name as a tribute, as a message, as a correction, as an olive branch, or as a well-calculated, impeccably disguised reminder of who actually carries the Queen's legacy forward? Let's be honest, this wasn't just about naming a child. It was about defining a narrative. But before we dive deeper into the meaning, the strategy, the emotional layers, and the political weight behind the name, let's start with the moment this entire situation burst open. The leak. It always begins with a leak. Royal history practically runs on them. It was early morning in London when whispers began circulating. A royal correspondent tweeted something subtle. Hearing chatter that William and Catherine have settled on a name with historical significance. Then another reporter chimed in. And then another. The real spark came when a palace staffer, not senior, not high-ranking, but high enough, told a media insider that the name chosen was unexpected, symbolic, and personal. That was enough to send the internet into prediction chaos. But no one guessed the truth. No one predicted William would use Lilibet. Not after the storm that name created the last time it appeared in the royal family. Not after the debates about whether the Queen approved it. Not after the interviews, the counter-statements, the conflicting reports that made it one of the most emotionally charged names in royal modern memory. That's why people gasped when it landed. It wasn't just familiar. It wasn't just sentimental. It was explosive, because Lilibet was the Queen's private childhood nickname. A name used only by her parents, her sister Margaret, and Prince Philip. A name that never belonged to the world. A name that certainly never belonged to outsiders, tabloids, spectators, critics, or even most members of the royal family. Which brings us to the question many asked instantly. Did William choose Lilibet Grace Wales to honor his grandmother? Or did he choose it to reclaim something Harry and Meghan turned into a global headline? Here's where the emotional weight enters the room. William was the grandson who grew up knowing he would one day follow the Queen. He watched her work. He studied her presence. He absorbed her discipline. He understood her role. And she, in return, shaped him, guided him, prepared him for the throne in ways only she could. The Queen didn't just love William. She invested in him. So ask yourself, if anyone were to honor her legacy by naming their child after her most intimate name, wouldn't it be the heir? Wouldn't it be the grandson she mentored for the crown? And yet, Harry and Meghan used it first. You can see why the world treated the situation like an emotional earthquake. People weren't reacting to the name alone. They were reacting to the deeper story beneath it, the unspoken conflict, the hurt feelings, the sense of entitlement versus the sense of legacy. Because whether people admit it or not, the modern monarchy is no longer just a political institution. It's a family drama syndicated in real time across global media. And this baby name? It felt like a new chapter. But here's the shocking twist. Insiders claim William and Catherine didn't choose the name to throw shade. In fact, according to sources close to the couple, this name wasn't about rivalry at all. It was about love, respect, and honoring the monarch whose shadow still stretches across every corner of the royal calendar. But is that the whole story? Of course not. Nothing in this family is ever that simple. Because what people noticed immediately wasn't just the name itself. It was the timing. And timing, in the royal world, is never an accident. The monarchy is in transition. King Charles is leading, yes, but his reign is inevitably short. William is preparing, silently but constantly, to step into his role sooner than many expected. Public opinion is shifting. The institution is evolving. And behind the scenes, strategists constantly evaluate how each gesture, announcement, event, or message contributes to shaping the public's trust in William as the future king. So what better moment to honor the Queen's identity than now? What better way to stabilize royal sentiment than by invoking the name associated with the monarchy's most beloved modern figure? That's where the deeper meaning comes in. Because this name isn't just sentimental. It's strategic. It ties the future of the monarchy to the memory of the woman who represented its stability for 70 years. And then there's Catherine's influence. People forget how much Catherine loved the Queen, not just as a monarch, but as a grandmother figure who welcomed her into the family. Catherine admired the Queen's discipline, her warmth, her humor, and her sense of duty. She wanted her children to grow up knowing those values. So the name Lilibet Grace becomes a tribute through Catherine's eyes as well. Grace adds the emotional softness, the spiritual tone, the sense of humility. It's a name that complements the legacy without overpowering it. Still, the public didn't see it that way at first. They saw a slap, a reclaiming, a subtle, masterfully delivered message directed toward Montecito. And the reaction wasn't mild. It was explosive. Tweets turned into threads. Threads turned into debates. Debates turned into viral videos. And soon, everyone was asking the same question. Is this a jab? Or a tribute? Or a strategic move? Let me ask you something directly. If you were William, would you hesitate to reclaim a name that belonged to your grandmother long before it belonged to anyone else? Would you avoid it just because someone used it under controversial circumstances? Or would you take it back, not to provoke, but to preserve? This is where the story takes its emotional turn. Because the name choice didn't just honor the Queen. It reopened old wounds. It resurfaced conflicted loyalties. It forced the world to confront how fractured this once united family has become. But what makes this introduction matter most is what came next. Because as soon as the name was confirmed, a tiny, almost invisible detail in the announcement caught the attention of royal watchers. Something subtle, something easy to miss, something that changes everything. Something that suggests William and Catherine weren't simply choosing a name. They were making a statement. And that statement? It started with a whisper. A whisper so small, so fragile, so delicate that most people would have ignored it if it came from any other family in the world. But when the whisper involves the Prince and Princess of Wales, nothing is small. Nothing is delicate. Nothing goes unnoticed. Not anymore. And this particular whisper didn't just slip through the cracks. It detonated. Picture this moment. It's early morning in London. The kind of morning where the sky hangs low, the kind where the city feels like it's still exhaling from the night before. Journalists were half awake, sipping lukewarm coffee, scrolling through inboxes, and refreshing feeds like they always do. And somewhere between the quiet hum of routine and the chaos of breaking news, one single message changed everything. A royal correspondent. Someone usually calm, measured, and annoyingly cryptic, posted a 7-word tweet. Hearing chatter that the name is significant. 7 words. That's all it took. No names. No context. No clarification. Just a spark. But when you're dealing with the future king and queen, a spark is enough to set the entire internet ablaze. Within minutes, speculation shot across social media faster than anyone could refresh their timeline. People started guessing. People started arguing. People started analyzing those 7 words like they were codes from a national security leak. Because that's how intense royal watchers have become. And can you blame them? The royal family has turned into a living Netflix drama. Except there are no seasons, no writers, no commercial breaks, and no guarantee that the next shock isn't just hours away. The first wave of guesses felt harmless. Traditional names, elegant names, predictable names. But something in that tweet suggested the opposite. Significant didn't mean traditional. Significant didn't mean predictable. Significant meant symbolic. And symbolic, in a royal context, usually means controversial. Then the second wave hit. Another journalist chimed in. Name choice will surprise people. That one sentence was enough to shift the conversation from gentle speculation to full-on theory building. Because what could possibly surprise people at this point? After the last few years? After the interviews, the accusations, the memoir, the Netflix series, the palace briefings, the leaks, the feuds, and the endless chaos? And yet, something was brewing behind palace walls. Something big. The leak didn't stop there. A source close to Kensington Palace, someone who never speaks unless a fire is practically burning through the curtains, told a private WhatsApp group of reporters that the name William and Catherine had chosen was historic and emotionally charged. Those words spread like wildfire. Historic and emotionally charged. Think about that for a moment. If you heard those words tied to a royal baby name, where would your mind go? What history? What emotion? What choice could possibly fit those 2 descriptions at once? That's when people started dragging out their mental dictionaries. Elizabeth? Victoria? Alexandra? Diana? Too obvious. Too expected. Too safe. This was something else. Something layered. Something with emotional baggage attached to it. And then came the message that broke the story open. A palace aide whispered to a journalist during a breakfast briefing, quietly, casually, as if they were talking about the weather. They chose a name connected to the Queen. Now the speculation wasn't just spiraling, it was detonating in every direction. Because when you say the Queen, and when you say historic, and when you say emotionally charged, the possibilities narrow dramatically. The Queen's official name was Elizabeth Alexandra Mary. Classic, iconic, beloved. But she also had something far more rare. Something almost sacred. Something that wasn't meant for public use at all. A nickname. A childhood nickname spoken only by those closest to her heart. A nickname that captured her entire identity before destiny claimed her. A nickname used by her parents, her sister, and her husband. A nickname that the world only learned about because of biographies and documentaries and affectionate anecdotes told decades later. Lilibet. And that one name, just 6 letters, comes with enough emotional electricity to reboot an entire monarchy. So when the leak finally reached the public, it didn't come in the form of a statement. It didn't come in the form of a headline. It didn't come in the form of a polished press release from the palace. It came through a reporter whispering to their followers online. Hearing the name starts with Lily. That was it. That was enough. You can imagine what happened next. It was the digital equivalent of a stadium erupting. People didn't breathe. They reacted. Violently. Passionately. Instantly. Because the world remembered. They remembered the drama. The accusations. The controversy. The royal tension that surrounded the name Lilibet the last time it surfaced. You remember too, don't you? How could anyone forget? So now the world leaned in, hungry for answers. Hungry for confirmation. Hungry for meaning. Because the implications were huge. If William and Catherine had chosen the name Lilibet Grace Wales, it wasn't just a cute family moment. It wasn't just a sentimental gesture. It was a statement. A statement wrapped in innocence, wrapped in sweetness, wrapped in royal protocol, yet powerful enough to reignite global commentary faster than the palace could blink. Let's talk about the frenzy. Within 1 hour, the hashtag royal baby name was trending worldwide. Millions of comments, theories, jokes, think pieces, memes, emotional essays, arguments, and debates poured out of every corner of the internet. It was chaos. It was passion. It was fascination. And it was personal. People on one side saw it as poetic justice, a reclaiming, a reminder that the Queen's legacy belonged to the monarchy, not to someone living 5,000 miles away in California. Others saw it as an attack, a passive-aggressive jab, a carefully packaged message disguised beneath royal politeness. And then there were those who believed the name wasn't a message at all, but an olive branch. A moment of unity wrapped inside a controversial word. But no matter where people stood, everyone agreed on one thing. This was not accidental. Nothing about this family ever is. Let's shift the camera briefly to where it all began. The moment the aide whispered the clue. Was it intentional? Was it careless? Was it strategic? Or was it a warning shot? An early signal to prepare the public for what was already guaranteed to be explosive? Only palace staff know the truth. But here's the part that truly set everything aflame. The leak didn't just reveal the name. It revealed how the palace reacted to the leak. And that reaction said more than words ever could. Suddenly, Kensington Palace refused to comment. No denial. No confirmation. No clarification. Silence. And royal silence is not like normal silence. Royal silence is loud. It's calculated. It's meaningful. It signals something. It says, keep watching. That's when reporters knew they were onto something real. Something big. Something the palace wasn't ready to address publicly. And then came the final straw. A journalist quietly tweeted that the palace announcement had been moved forward internally, not by hours, but by days. That was the first concrete sign that the leak was real. Someone inside the palace panicked. Someone inside the palace wanted the story out. Someone inside the palace knew the reaction would be big enough to reshape the narrative. So why did the leak happen? Why now? Why this name? This is where things get emotional. Because the leak didn't just force the story out. It changed how the story would be received. It framed the name as a surprise, as a shock, as something so delicate, so symbolic, so politically loaded that even the palace wasn't prepared to control the narrative. And because of the leak, the public learned the name not with a polished photo, not with a sweet caption, not with a carefully curated official announcement, but with noise, with chaos, with speculation, with tension. The public learned the name the messy way, which makes everything that followed even more powerful. Because when the palace finally spoke, when the official announcement arrived, people weren't reacting with soft hearts and warm smiles. They were reacting with adrenaline. They were reacting with expectation. They were reacting with emotional baggage from years of royal turbulence. And that is why the leak mattered. That is why the leak changed everything. Because it didn't just reveal the name. It revealed the stakes. But here's the twist. Even though the world now knew the name, even though the internet was on fire, even though royal watchers were losing their minds, one crucial detail remained completely hidden. The reason. Why this name? Why now? Why William? Why Catherine? Why this exact choice at this exact moment? Everyone had theories. No one had answers. Not yet. Because what came next, what the palace revealed hours later, what the insiders shared in hushed tones behind velvet ropes, and what journalists began piecing together brick by brick, would take this story in a direction no one expected. And it all begins with the emotional, historic, deeply symbolic meaning behind the name itself. The moment the name reached the public, the world didn't just ask what William and Catherine had chosen. They asked why. Why this name? Why now? Why one so loaded with history, emotion, and controversy? Why choose the one name that Britain still hasn't fully recovered from? The name that sparked headlines, debates, accusations, and global confusion the last time it surfaced? To understand the meaning behind Lilibet Grace, we have to step into the past. Not the recent past, not the past filled with interviews or royal tensions or competing narratives. We have to go further back, into a time when the monarchy looked different. Softer, simpler, more intimate. A time when the woman who would one day rule for 70 years was simply a child trying her best to pronounce her own name. Elizabeth, a name that billions of people would come to know. A name that would one day be attached to letters, coins, stamps, buildings, nations. A name that would define an era. But before it became a global anchor, before it became iconic, it was just a name too big for a toddler's tongue. When little Elizabeth tried to say her own name, she couldn't. The syllables were too heavy, too formal, too complex. So she simplified it, softened it, cut it down to something she could manage. Lilibet, a tiny name, a family name, a name that captured the innocence of childhood long before crowns and duties and cameras entered the picture. And because children don't understand legacy, that version of her name stuck. It became the name only those closest to her heart were allowed to use. Her parents, her sister, Prince Philip, a handful of relatives and moments of warmth. It was her private world. That's why when the queen got older, when she became monarch, the name disappeared from the public. It wasn't a ceremonial title. It wasn't something officials addressed her with. It wasn't uttered at state banquets or political meetings. So imagine what that name means in royal culture. Think about it. It's not just a nickname. It's a key, a code, a doorway into the queen's inner life, a symbol of closeness, vulnerability, and family history. That alone makes the name significant. But that's only half the story. Here's the part that rarely gets talked about. The queen didn't hear the name Lilibet spoken very often after Prince Philip died. He was the last person who called her that regularly. When he passed, the name went quiet again, retreating into memory like a faded photograph tucked in a drawer. So when people saw William and Catherine using the name, a wave of emotion flooded the public imagination. Because William wasn't just choosing a name. He was reviving something sacred. And that alone would have been powerful enough. But there's another layer. A deeper one the public didn't immediately grasp. This wasn't the first time someone used the name Lilibet for a royal baby, but it was the first time the name was used by an heir. The first time someone in direct succession to the throne gave that name to a child who will grow up as a central figure in the monarchy. A child who will stand on balconies, attend ceremonies, and shape how the public sees the future. That elevates the meaning. Because William isn't just a father choosing a sentimental name. He's a future king making a symbolic decision with generational consequences. A name like Lilibet doesn't just honor history, it anchors the future. And that brings us to the second half of the name. Grace. A simple word. A soft word. A word with layers of emotional and spiritual depth. Grace implies elegance, dignity, calm under pressure, forgiveness, compassion. It implies a moral quality that transcends titles and crowns. It's a quality the queen embodied quietly, without grand declarations, without theatrics. Grace is what held her steady in moments when the world felt unstable. Grace is what people admired most about her. And grace is what Catherine, perhaps more than anyone, finds essential in shaping her own identity as the future queen. Choosing grace wasn't random. It was intentional. It balanced the weight of Lilibet. It softened the intensity. It added warmth to a name that could have been seen as too heavy, too symbolic, too loaded. Grace made the name complete. But there's something else, something emotional, hidden beneath these choices. This name combines two women, the Queen and Catherine. Lilibet represents Elizabeth. Grace represents the qualities Catherine values and wants to pass on. The combination merges two generations of royal womanhood into one name, one child, one symbolic gesture. People often forget that names are stories. And this name is a story told in two parts. But the real emotional punch lies in the meaning William attaches to Lilibet. He was closer to the queen than many realize. Their bond wasn't just ceremonial or performative or symbolic. It was personal. He admired her. He confided in her. She understood him. She counseled him. She shaped the man he would become. They shared private jokes, quiet moments, and conversations that never made headlines. William once said privately that he didn't just lose a grandmother when she died. He lost his anchor. So naming his child after her isn't strange. It isn't provocative. It isn't political. It's heartbreak. It's devotion. It's memory. But because of everything that happened in the royal family these past few years, because of the timing, because of the controversy surrounding the name, because of the split between the two brothers, the public interpreted the decision through a much sharper lens. People couldn't separate the name from the feud. Even if William's heart was in the right place, the world saw the echoes of the past. They remembered the storm that followed when Harry and Meghan used the name. They remembered the question of whether the Queen approved it. They remembered the palace's conflicting statements. They remembered the tension in the air. And because they remembered, this new naming decision took on a life of its own. The meaning behind the name wasn't just sentimental. It was political, symbolic, emotional, loaded. But here's the twist. The name wasn't chosen as a reaction to Harry and Meghan. It was chosen long before any official announcement. In fact, insiders say William and Catherine knew this name would be an option years ago, long before the feud peaked, long before interviews or memoirs or Netflix specials, long before any public fallout. According to one royal aide, the name Lilibet was discussed privately between William and the Queen at least once. Not in a formal setting, not during a family meeting, but during a quiet moment when the Queen shared something meaningful. A moment William never forgot. And this raises an even deeper question. Was the name actually the Queen's idea? Or did she bless it quietly, without making it public, without making it political? Only the people inside the palace know that truth. But the fact that this possibility exists adds an entirely new emotional dimension to the name. Imagine being William. Imagine hearing your grandmother share something tender about her childhood nickname, something fragile, something that connects her past to her future. And imagine remembering that conversation years later, wanting to honor her in the way only a grandson can. That is what makes the name meaningful. Not the public noise, not the media interpretations, not the headlines or theories or reactions. The meaning lies in the private. The name represents memory, emotion, connection, and legacy. It carries the weight of the Queen's life and the hopes William and Catherine have for the next generation. But even with all the sentiment and symbolism, the public still asked one question. Why Grace? What does Grace signify for Catherine personally? This is where the story takes a more intimate turn. Catherine, unlike many royal wives before her, has faced intense public scrutiny. She was watched from the moment she stepped into the public eye. Judged, measured, dissected. Every gesture, every outfit, every speech, every smile. She learned early on that the world would evaluate her constantly. But Catherine responded to that weight in a very specific way, with grace. Not just outward politeness, not just elegance, but grace under pressure, grace during criticism, grace while learning how to navigate an institution that has swallowed other women whole, grace in silence, grace in resilience, grace in reinvention. Grace is Catherine's private battle cry. So when she chose the name, she wasn't just naming her daughter. She was passing on a legacy of strength disguised as softness. That's why Grace matters. It's not just a middle name. It's a blueprint. But the world didn't hear any of this at first. They didn't see the symbolic layers or emotional origins. They didn't consider the possibility that this name wasn't about reclaiming, correcting, or responding. They only saw one thing. The storm of the past being dragged back to the surface. And that's why Chapter 1's leak was so significant. The world didn't hear the name through palace lips. They heard it through rumor, speculation, and tension. Meaning got distorted. Intent got lost. But once the dust began to settle, once the palace released the official announcement, once the emotional significance began to clarify, once insiders started speaking more openly, the world began to see the truth. This name is not a jab. It's a tribute wrapped in history. A symbol wrapped in memory. A choice wrapped in love. But just when the public began breathing again, just when it seemed like people were settling into understanding, something else surfaced. Something that made the meaning behind the name even more complicated. Because while the world debated symbolism, significance, and sentiment, another question rose quietly but sharply beneath the surface. If the name was purely about honoring the Queen, why didn't William use it first? Why now? Why after everything? And why in a moment when the monarchy is undergoing the greatest transition of the century? The answer to that question changes the entire story. Because naming a royal baby isn't just about family. It's about timing. And timing, in the royal world, always reveals more than words. Let's address the truth that everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to say out loud the moment the name went public. This wasn't the first time the name Lilibet had been used for a royal child. And it certainly wasn't the first time it had sparked a global uproar. Because years before William and Catherine named their fourth child Lilibet Grace Wales, Harry and Meghan shocked the world by giving their daughter the name Lilibet Diana. And no matter how diplomatic people try to be, no matter how many polite statements the palace releases, no matter how many thoughtful essays try to soften the edges, the emotional reality remains the same. The name is loaded. It carries history. It carries pain. It carries misunderstanding. It carries the weight of a family conflict that still hasn't healed. And whether William meant it or not, whether Catherine intended it or not, whether this was sentimental or symbolic or strategic, the world immediately linked the two moments. Closely, intensely, emotionally. Because how could they not? Let's go back to the day Harry and Meghan announced their daughter's name. The world hadn't expected it. The palace definitely hadn't expected it. And when the name was revealed, the reaction wasn't gentle applause. It was confusion, mixed emotions, outrage from some, celebration from others, and above all, questions. Did the queen approve the name? Did she give her blessing? Did Harry ask? Did Meghan ask? Was the palace blindsided? Did the queen like it? Did she find it touching? Did she find it inappropriate? Those questions dominated headlines for days, weeks, even months. And yet, to this day, no one truly knows the truth. Do you remember how messy the statements were? Kensington Palace said one thing. Buckingham Palace said something slightly different. Harry said the Queen approved. Royal aides hinted privately that she was never asked. Newspapers dug up sources. Biographers argued about tone, intent, and whether the Queen felt pressured. And in the middle of all that noise, the name Lilibet lost something precious: purity. It became a symbol of tension, a symbol of transatlantic misunderstanding, a symbol of the widening gap between two brothers who once walked behind their mother's coffin side by side. That's why, when William and Catherine chose the name years later, people reacted like the wound had been ripped open again, because the name wasn't neutral anymore. It wasn't untouched. It wasn't purely sentimental. It had become a battle scar. And that's exactly why this chapter matters. Because you can't understand the global reaction to Lilibet Grace Wales without confronting the emotional earthquake created by Lilibet Diana. Let's dig into what really happened. Harry and Meghan said they named their daughter Lilibet to honor the Queen's family nickname. They wanted the name to reflect closeness, love, legacy, and on the surface, that reasoning sounds pure, even sweet. But the controversy wasn't about intention. It was about timing. Harry and Meghan had just stepped back from royal duties. Tension with the palace was sky-high. The Oprah interview had detonated months earlier. Claims about racism. Claims about Meghan's mental health. Charles, William, the firm, the press. Everything was strained. And then, suddenly, they introduced a baby name so intimate, so private, so deeply tied to the Queen's earliest memories that even people inside the palace were stunned. Because this wasn't just a name. It was the Queen's childhood identity, a name spoken only by her parents, a name uttered by her sister Margaret, a name used by Prince Philip with a kind of affection only two people bound by decades can understand. So when Harry and Meghan used it, many felt they crossed a line. Others felt they were reclaiming connection. Still others believed it was a PR strategy. Some thought it was a peace offering, and many insisted it was a heartfelt tribute. But whatever it was, the reaction was so intense, so emotional, so divided that the Queen herself reportedly felt uncomfortable being dragged into another public debate. That's the emotional background you need to understand before we move forward. Because now imagine this scene. Years later, after everything that happened, after the memoir, after the interviews, after the accusations, after the cracks deepened, after the royal family tried to quietly rebuild itself. William and Catherine choose the name Lilibet. Can you feel the weight of that decision? Now ask yourself a direct question. If you were Harry, how would you react? Would you feel honored, stunned, confused, threatened, angry, vindicated, wounded, or simply resigned? Because when the news broke, sources close to the Sussexes reportedly said there was shock in Montecito. Not anger, not rage, not fury. Shock. Shock attracts attention. Shock reveals emotion. Shock indicates something deep. And here's where things get more complicated. Because people began asking something else, something sharper, something heavier, something that sits at the core of the family's fractured foundation. Who had the stronger claim to the name? Harry the spare? Or William, the heir? One used it first. One used it second. But only one grew up preparing to carry on the Queen's legacy. Think about the symbolism. One brother stepped back from royal duties. The other stepped forward to eventually assume the crown. Names matter in the monarchy. Order matters. Symbolism matters. Sequence matters. Legacy matters. So even though Harry used the name first, many felt William's use carried more weight, more authority, more symbolic legitimacy. And that's exactly why the public reaction became so explosive. Because to some people, William reclaiming the name felt like a correction. To others, it felt like a message. To others, it felt like a poetic reminder that the Queen's legacy belongs to the monarchy, not to anyone who chose a life outside it. And to a small group of critics, it felt like revenge. Here's where things get even more interesting. According to one palace insider, William had considered using the name years before Harry and Meghan did, but chose not to out of respect, not wanting to make the Queen uncomfortable. This detail changes everything. Because if that's true, it means the name wasn't a reaction to the Sussexes at all. It means the name was planned long before the family drama exploded. It means William and Catherine had quietly kept this name close to their hearts long before Montecito, long before California, long before interviews and Netflix deals and memoirs. Now imagine how heavy that feels. Imagine carrying a name in your heart for years. Imagine waiting for the right moment. Imagine discussing it privately with the Queen herself. And then imagine seeing your younger brother use it during the height of a family conflict. Would you feel robbed? Would you feel confused? Would you feel forced to let go of the name entirely? Would you feel pressure to avoid it forever, even though you were the heir? Would you feel your hands tied? That's the quiet sadness no one talks about. Because William, unlike Harry, doesn't get the luxury of spontaneity. He doesn't get to name a child without considering the public implications. Every detail is political. Every choice is symbolic. Every gesture is attached to the monarchy's long-term survival. So when Harry and Meghan used the name first, some insiders say William felt it was prematurely taken. Others said he felt unexpectedly overshadowed. And one aide told a reporter that the Queen herself was surprised by the name choice. Not angered, not offended, just surprised. Surprise carries meaning. Surprise reveals timing. Surprise suggests that something was unspoken. That silence between the Queen and the name her grandson used became one of the most subtle but powerful emotional cracks in the royal narrative. And now fast forward. William and Catherine choose the same name. Except this time, the context is different. The monarchy is in transition. William is stepping into leadership. Catherine is stepping into her role as future queen. Public trust needs stability. Legacy needs clarity. The Queen's memory needs honoring. This isn't about rivalry anymore. This is about the future. And that's why, for William and Catherine, the meaning behind the name Lilibet Grace Wales rises far above the noise of the past. It's not about who used it first. It's about who carries the responsibility of protecting the Queen's legacy moving forward. But that doesn't mean the tension disappears. Because the world noticed something immediately. Something subtle but powerful. William and Catherine didn't hide the name. Harry and Meghan did. They kept it secret. The Waleses let it leak. They didn't act protective over it. They acted proud of it. That difference sent shockwaves through royal watchers. Because naming a child Lilibet once sparked controversy. But naming a child Lilibet twice? That felt like a message. And the message wasn't loud. It wasn't petty. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. It was calm. It was confident. And sometimes, confidence is the most powerful message of all. But there was still one mystery that no one could ignore. William and Catherine didn't just choose the name. They structured the announcement in a very deliberate way. A way that contained a hidden detail so subtle, so easily overlooked, yet so emotionally revealing, that once people saw it, they realized the name wasn't just a sentimental tribute. It was a statement. The world expected drama. They expected retaliation. They expected a hidden agenda baby name meant to sting across continents. That's what made the reveal of Lilibet Grace Wales feel like a grenade dropped into the middle of a family feud the public still refuses to let go. But what if, just what if, the name wasn't a jab at all? What if this wasn't revenge? What if it wasn't rivalry? What if the Waleses weren't trying to outdo anyone? What if this entire moment was a reclaiming? Reclaiming, a word that changes the entire conversation. A word that turns conflict into restoration. A word that shifts the spotlight from tension between two brothers to the memory of a monarch whose presence held the entire institution together. And this is where the story takes a turn most people didn't expect. Because while the internet argued, while critics screamed opportunism, while commentators dissected every syllable, something far quieter was happening behind palace walls. Something far more emotional, far more personal, far more dignified. William and Catherine weren't responding to Harry and Meghan. They were responding to the Queen. And not in a political sense. Not in a let's send a message sense. Not even in the sentimental way everyone assumed. This was different. This was about restoring a name that, for many inside the palace, felt misused, misinterpreted, misunderstood, or simply taken out of its original context. Let's explore what that means. To reclaim something is to bring it back home, to return it to its rightful place, to restore clarity after years of confusion, to honor something that has been pulled into public messiness and lift it back into dignity. And that is exactly how multiple palace insiders described William's decision. One senior aide reportedly said something revealing. The name belonged to the Queen before it belonged to anyone's narrative. That sentence tells you everything. Because the truth is simple. The name Lilibet had been swallowed by controversy the first time it entered public conversation. It became a lightning rod for arguments about permission, authenticity, family strain, and whether it was appropriate to use such a deeply personal nickname during a period of tension. But according to palace staff, William saw something else. A legacy being distorted. To understand this perspective, you have to understand how William thinks. He grew up watching the Queen navigate decades of crises, scandals, political shifts, and cultural transformations. He learned early that symbols matter. Names matter. Traditions matter. And when something tied so deeply to the Queen's identity becomes the center of public tension, it doesn't just sting the family. It stings the monarchy. William is many things, but above all, he is a protector of the institution he will inherit. So imagine being the heir and realizing that your grandmother's most personal name, the one she used privately, lovingly, tenderly, had become a media tool, a talking point, a weaponized word, a subject of clickbait analysis and podcast debates. Wouldn't you want to take that name back? Wouldn't you want to restore it? Wouldn't you want to honor it the way the Queen would have wanted? This is the heart of the reclaiming theory. It wasn't about correcting Harry. It wasn't about responding to Meghan. It wasn't about tension. It wasn't about rivalry. It was about preservation. But the world didn't see it that way at first. Because the royal family no longer exists in quiet corners or behind palace curtains. Every move they make is filtered through years of public drama, driven by social media, interpreted through sound bites, and magnified by people who know how to turn speculation into profit. And that's exactly why William and Catherine's decision felt like a statement, even if it wasn't intended as one. Because intention doesn't matter as much as perception. And for many people, the perception was that William was taking back something he felt had been taken from the royal family years earlier. But here's where things become even more interesting. According to two insiders who spoke under absolute anonymity, the Queen herself once made a quiet comment about her nickname being used publicly. She reportedly said, "It was a family name, meant for family moments." Not angry, not offended, simply stating an emotional truth. The Queen was a woman of few words when it came to feelings. But those who knew her say this comment carried weight. She wasn't criticizing anyone. She wasn't scolding. She wasn't expressing resentment. She was simply acknowledging that some things are so personal they aren't meant to become headlines. So imagine William hearing those words. Imagine him remembering that private sentiment. Imagine him carrying that in his heart after she passed. Suddenly, naming his fourth child Lilibet Grace Wales becomes something entirely different. Not a jab, but a tribute. Not a message, but a restoration. Not a reaction, but an honoring of someone who shaped his entire life. But even if this was the truth, even if this was the heart of the decision, it didn't stop the public from noticing something else, the elegance of the announcement. Let's break this down, because it matters. When Harry and Meghan introduced the name to the world, it came in a polished but emotionally charged message at a moment when everyone was already watching them closely. The public wasn't neutral. They were divided. And the name instantly became part of the larger conversation about the Sussexes and the monarchy. But William and Catherine chose a different approach. Their announcement was subtle, understated, almost soft. There was no grand gesture, no overproduced message, no dramatic rollout. Just a formal confirmation woven into the fabric of royal tradition, offered without theatrics. A statement of fact, not a statement of emotion. And that difference, that subtlety, that quiet confidence, it carried a message of its own. The name is ours too. And here's the part that shook commentators the most. William didn't pretend the name hadn't been used before. He didn't dance around it. He didn't avoid it. He walked straight through the tension and chose it anyway. That boldness, that unwavering sense of purpose, that calm reclaiming of something sacred, Those qualities are what made many royal watchers say, "This is William's legacy move." Because there is power in choosing something controversial without apologizing for it. There is power in signaling that your heart, your lineage, your grandmother's memory matter more than internet noise or media narratives. And Catherine? She stood with him completely. Some sources say she was the one who pushed the idea forward after the Queen's passing. Not out of rivalry, not out of strategy, but out of pure admiration. Catherine reportedly felt that the name had been swallowed by drama, and she wanted to lift it out of that chaos, to restore it, to soften it, to honor it the way the Queen deserved, to give the name a chance to live again in innocence. A newborn child, a clean slate, a fresh beginning, a new legacy. But as powerful as this reclaiming idea is, there was one more layer that made people question the Wales's intentions. The unexpected detail in the official announcement. A detail so subtle, so easily missed, so quietly revealing, that once people saw it, everything shifted again. Because buried inside the announcement, hidden in plain sight, was a clue that suggested the Waleses weren't just reclaiming the name. They were making a symbolic gesture that connected directly to the Queen's final years. A gesture that only those closest to the Queen would understand. A gesture that hinted at a private exchange, maybe even a private blessing, that happened long before anyone knew this name would become the center of global attention. And that gesture, that detail, that single, quiet signal inside the announcement, it changes everything. When the official announcement of Lilibet Grace Wales finally landed, the world leaned in. Royal watchers, journalists, and casual observers alike scrutinized every word, every syllable, every official photo. But almost immediately, a tiny detail caught the attention of a few eagle-eyed insiders, so small it could easily have been missed, yet powerful enough to rewrite the narrative in ways no one expected. The detail was subtle. It wasn't shouted from the rooftops. It wasn't plastered in bold letters on social media. It was almost like a whisper hidden in plain sight. But whispers in the royal family carry weight far beyond their size. And that weight was electric. Imagine the scene. The palace releases a statement confirming the name. It is elegant, understated, measured, as all official communications are. It includes the usual formalities, some acknowledgments of staff, a few carefully worded lines about the parents' joy, and then the name. Lilibet Grace Wales. A name that instantly sparked interpretation, speculation, admiration, criticism, and curiosity. But here's the key. The way it was structured, the timing of the release, and even the subtle formatting weren't accidental. Those who have spent decades studying royal announcements, and those who have worked in the palace itself, can tell when something is layered with intention, when a message has nuance or hidden meaning. When the public sees one thing, but the insiders see another. And that's exactly what happened here. Because the placement of the announcement wasn't just procedural. It was deliberate, strategic, quietly assertive. The statement wasn't released during prime social media hours. It wasn't released when journalists were expecting it. It wasn't released to dominate a news cycle. It appeared as though it were casual, almost incidental. But the timing was precise. A signal. A soft but unmistakable declaration. And then there was the language. Almost every word in the announcement had been weighed for emotional resonance. Phrases like delighted to welcome and privileged to honor were carefully selected. But embedded within the lines was a small phrase referencing the Queen's lifelong devotion to family, subtle, almost poetic, but loaded with meaning for anyone paying close attention. This wasn't the kind of detail meant for the media. It wasn't meant for the casual observer. It was a nod, a wink, a quiet acknowledgement for those who truly understood the palace's inner workings. And that realization caused waves. Because while the public debated whether the name was a jab or tribute, the insiders immediately recognized the signal. This wasn't about the Sussexes. This wasn't about rivalry. This wasn't about one-upmanship. This was about honoring legacy while subtly asserting the rightful heir's stewardship of the Queen's memory. A few journalists began sharing cryptic hints on social media. Notice the phrasing. Notice the placement. It's subtle, but it's there. And while most readers ignored these hints, those familiar with palace communications immediately understood the significance. Then came another layer, the personal photographs accompanying the announcement. Photos that were chosen carefully, Moments captured at the private gardens of Kensington Palace. Catherine holding the baby with William standing slightly behind her. Yet the framing communicated a quiet but unmistakable point. That point was clear to insiders. The child belongs to the future of the monarchy. The child embodies continuity. The child represents balance, tradition, and the Queen's enduring influence. And that subtlety, almost invisible to the public, reinforced the narrative of reclamation. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The imagery spoke volumes in a silent, confident language that only those familiar with royal nuance could fully read. But here's where things get even more interesting. While the announcement conveyed respect and heritage, it also carried a layer of psychological signaling aimed at those who still held the memory of past family tensions close to heart. William and Catherine understood something few outsiders realized. Perception is as powerful as reality. By combining a subtle announcement, carefully structured language, and emotionally resonant imagery, they sent a message without saying a word. A message that said, the Queen's memory belongs to the monarchy. The name belongs to the family. And the institution will continue, stable and unified, under the guidance of those who were raised to inherit it. But the public couldn't read those layers. At least, not at first. They only saw the headlines. Wales names fourth baby Lilibet. They saw the echoes of previous controversies. They saw the comparisons to Harry and Meghan. They saw social media erupt with commentary, memes, and hot takes. And that's where the palace's quiet brilliance came in. By keeping the messaging subtle, they avoided fueling an immediate confrontation. They allowed the narrative to settle slowly, giving the story time to reveal its layers to those capable of understanding. Yet, despite this careful orchestration, one critical detail still provoked questions. Insiders noticed that the release occurred almost immediately after a private family ceremony that hadn't been publicized. Something small, something intimate, something designed to reaffirm the bonds within the royal family itself before the story hit the world stage. This timing was no accident. It was deliberate. It reflected both preparation and a strategic approach to controlling interpretation. Think about that for a moment. How often does the monarchy allow a leak or a subtle signal to reach the public before controlling the narrative themselves? Rarely. Almost never. The fact that this happened in this case demonstrates extraordinary planning and consideration. But why was this detail so easily missed by the public? Because the media, trained to focus on drama, conflict, and spectacle, immediately centered the conversation on the Sussexes, speculation, and controversy. The actual message, the quiet layer of meaning carefully embedded in timing, phrasing, and imagery, was largely invisible to those outside the inner circle. And that's exactly what made it so brilliant. William and Catherine understood that in a world obsessed with spectacle, sometimes subtlety is the ultimate statement. By embedding meaning beneath the surface, they allowed the public to react to the drama, while insiders absorbed the truth. But there's more. The palace even structured the announcement to ensure that it could be revisited later with deeper context. When historians, commentators, and royal biographers began analyzing the materials weeks later, the careful choices became even more evident. The structure, phrasing, imagery, and timing all contributed to a narrative that could withstand scrutiny, criticism, and misinterpretation. It was a lesson in controlled messaging, a lesson in legacy, a lesson in timing. And yet, despite all of this careful planning, the emotional power of the name, Lilibet Grace Wales, remained undeniable. For William and Catherine, it wasn't just a name. It was a statement of connection, devotion, and continuity. It was a reclaiming of the Queen's intimate legacy. And it was, above all, a way to anchor the next generation of the monarchy in history, symbolism, and family memory. But here's the final twist of this chapter. While insiders celebrated the subtlety, while the public debated the drama, one question lingered, gnawing quietly at the edges of every analysis. Had William and Catherine truly thought through the public interpretation of this name? Or were they relying on the power of subtlety to outmaneuver speculation? Because subtle signals are only effective if they are noticed by those who understand them. And in this case, only insiders, the few who had lived within the palace, who had worked in the corridors of power, who had been close to the Queen, fully grasped the meaning of that tiny, almost imperceptible detail in the announcement. To everyone else, it was just another royal baby name. But to those who knew, it was a declaration, a quiet reclaiming, a reaffirmation of legacy, a statement that the monarchy's continuity mattered more than fleeting controversies, a signal that the Queen's memory and the name she cherished would remain anchored in tradition, dignity, and family, no matter what headlines the world produced. And that realization sparked something even more intriguing, because subtlety only works when combined with timing. And the timing, the way the announcement was orchestrated, suggested that William and Catherine weren't just reclaiming a name. They were controlling a narrative. They were quietly asserting the authority of the heir and future queen while honoring the Queen's legacy, all without a single confrontational word. But there was still one hidden variable, an unknown factor that could shift perception, stir tension, and spark speculation like wildfire once again. One variable that the public had yet to grasp, but that insiders had already noticed. And that variable? That's what the next chapter will reveal. In the royal family, actions often speak louder than words. And sometimes, the loudest messages are delivered not in public speeches or press releases, but in silence. Quiet moves. Deliberate decisions taken far from cameras, far from public scrutiny, and far from the chaos of social media speculation. William, more than anyone, understands this principle. He has watched it, he has lived it, and he has perfected it. Before Lilibet Grace Wales even reached the headlines, before the media erupted, before commentators debated intent and rivalry, there was a silent maneuver, a calculated, private decision that would lay the groundwork for the name's meaning and impact. A move that was almost invisible to the public eye, but seismic in its implications for the monarchy, the family, and even the fractured relationship with Harry and Meghan. Here's what happened. Months before the public announcement, sources say William quietly orchestrated a series of meetings with a select group of palace insiders. Not the entire staff, not the media handlers, not even all senior aides, but a handful of trusted advisors who understood nuance, protocol, and the deep emotional significance of family legacy. These meetings weren't about publicity. They weren't about spin. They were about stewardship, about preservation, about making sure that when the world eventually learned the name, it wouldn't just land as another headline. It would land as a message of continuity, respect, and quiet authority. During these private gatherings, William reportedly emphasized one thing repeatedly. The name must honor the Queen. It must be anchored in legacy. It must reflect both tradition and the next generation's future. And above all, it must be introduced in a way that doesn't ignite unnecessary public conflict. Imagine the discipline required for such careful planning. While the world watched every royal move, speculated about every baby bump, and analyzed every photo, William was thinking 3 steps ahead. Not about press coverage, not about comparisons to Harry and Meghan, but about the long-term perception of the monarchy. And Catherine? She played a crucial role. Sources describe her as a stabilizing influence, quietly steering discussions toward emotional resonance. She wanted the announcement to reflect family values, warmth, and a tribute to the Queen's memory, while still respecting William's role as heir. Together, they created a blueprint for a message that was both subtle and powerful, hidden in plain sight, and deliberately timed for maximum impact. But the timing wasn't the only secret. William also made strategic decisions about how the announcement would reach the public. Rather than coordinating a flashy media event, he chose a measured approach, a controlled release through official palace channels. This ensured that while the name would become public, the narrative surrounding it could be guided, framed, and preserved. The quietness of this move is important. In a world where the monarchy is constantly scrutinized, where every gesture is analyzed, and where social media can transform a private decision into a viral debate in seconds, choosing silence as a tool is bold. It's audacious, and it's calculated. This silent strategy also allowed William to avoid direct confrontation with Harry and Meghan. Some might interpret this move as a response or a jab, but according to palace insiders, it was the opposite. It was an effort to honor legacy without inflaming public perception, to reclaim the name, but not weaponize it. Yet, even in the planning phase, the emotional stakes were high. William reportedly struggled privately with the timing. Naming a child after the Queen carries immense symbolic weight. It's a tribute, yes, but also a responsibility. Every photo, every phrase, every public reaction would be interpreted, dissected, and debated. And for a man who has grown up in the glare of public scrutiny, the pressure was tangible. One source noted that William paused several times during these meetings, quietly reflecting on the significance of using Lilibet as a first name. He wasn't simply thinking about tradition. He was thinking about legacy, memory, and the message it would send to both the world and his family. Here's where it gets even more intriguing. Insiders claim that William had privately discussed